this month.
There are two guests.
Two guests,
Two
that's
guests.
right.
And it's in the field of cerebral palsy and related.
So, we'll call first on Frank Blair for the news.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. Charles de Gaulle died during the night. He would have been 80 on November 22nd. Death was caused by a heart attack which struck him while he and his wife were watching television at their country home about 100 miles east of Paris. The French government announced his death today, and the nation went into mourning for the man who was the symbol of modern France. Radio stations canceled their regular programs and played only solemn music. The cabinet met, and in accordance with instructions he left 18 years ago, arrangements were made that he be buried near his country home and that his funeral be extremely simple. French President Georges Pompidou told his nation in a televised speech, "General de Gaulle is dead. France is a widow." The president said that in 1940, de Gaulle saved our honor. In 1944, he led us to liberation and to victory. In 1958, he saved us from civil war. He gave France her institutions, her place in the world. Pompidou concluded, "In the national soul, de Gaulle will live forever."
Most of the rest of the world and most Frenchmen had never heard of Charles de Gaulle in 1940 when Hitler's war machine knifed into France. But Colonel de Gaulle's tanks had stopped a German column, and in government circles he was known as an original and unorthodox military theorist. He was provisionally appointed Brigadier General and Assistant Secretary of War in time to watch France surrender. De Gaulle did not surrender. He flew to London, said it was his duty to assume the burdens of France. In broadcasts over the BBC, he appealed to his countrymen to carry on the fight. At first, Frenchmen were more mystified than inspired. But during an Allied strategy meeting in Casablanca, where de Gaulle reluctantly shook hands with a rival, General Henri Giraud, his influence began to be felt. The Cross of Lorraine and Charles de Gaulle were the symbols of the Free French underground that fought against the German occupiers. When the Allies invaded Normandy in 1944, de Gaulle was ready. He entered a liberated Paris in August 1944, and after vicious infighting among rival factions, he emerged as leader of France's provisional government. But de Gaulle found himself handcuffed by a divided government and by party political maneuvers that aroused his contempt. In January 1946, he packed his bags and retired to his country home in Colombey to await the call he was sure would come again. It took a long time. 12 years later, after a military disaster in Indochina, and when a revolt of French settlers and military men in Algeria threatened the government, de Gaulle was called in. In May 1958, President René Coty appointed him premier and gave him 6 months of virtual dictatorial power. Following 2 more Algerian revolts, including a bloody one by army officers in 1961 and an assassination attempt, independence for Algeria was overwhelmingly approved by referendum. Under de Gaulle, the strength of the French army continued to grow. Its weapons became more sophisticated, and de Gaulle's love for the independence of France burned brightly. The new glory of France reached its climax in the detonation of the country's first atomic bomb. Because of de Gaulle's attempted manipulation of the European common market and because he ordered Allied troops out of France, he was thoroughly unloved by the other members of NATO. In In 1968, de Gaulle's solidarity at home began to crumble. Leftist students rioted, and a general strike almost brought the country to a standstill. The aim was to topple de Gaulle, but he fought back and won a victory in parliamentary elections. In the words of the then Premier, Georges Pompidou, things would never be the same again.
In other news this morning, the two American generals, Claude McQuarrie and Edward Shearer, were released by the Soviet government and returned to Turkey today. They had been held prisoners since October 21st. The United States said their small plane strayed off course in a storm and landed in Soviet Armenia. The Turkish colonel who was with them on the flight was also freed. A Turkish government spokesman said all three were in good physical condition. The Soviet news agency TASS said that the American pilot of the plane, Major James Russell, would fly the plane back to Turkey as soon as weather permits. The Cambodian government's northern front was cut off from Phnom Penh today by the heaviest enemy attacks in more than 2 months, and thousands of government reinforcements trying to reach the battle zone were blocked by the destruction of an important bridge during the night. In Detroit, negotiators for the United Auto Workers Union and General Motors talked for 17 hours until 2 o'clock this morning. Then, on a hopeful note, they agreed to meet again later this morning. In New York City, the police and FBI came up with a clue to what has been happening to a lot of cars that disappear from the streets of America. They trailed a ship to the Dominican Republic with a cargo of stolen cars and then got it all back to New York Harbor.
She left here, the 31st Street Pier in Brooklyn, October 23rd. Only on this trip did authorities have enough evidence to act. They allowed the Poinciana to unload her legitimate cargo in the Dominican Republic, then ordered her back to Brooklyn with the stolen cars. Several of the legal owners showed up to watch their cars unloaded.
Believe me, I have never done any harm to anybody, but if I would catch this guy, I would strangle him myself.
A well-organized ring has been moving these cars. The thief would check the serial number of a particular car beforehand, get all the papers drawn up for shipping, then steal the car, possibly the same day the ship was to sail, and drive it to the pier. So far, there's been one arrest, a man who came down to pay for shipping some cars. A longshoreman on the pier told us this ring must have made a lot of money. We've been shipping these cars out of here for months. Well, there will be more arrests in this case. Authorities are hopeful, but not certain they'll be able to nail the top men in this organization. In the meantime, there are about 30 cars waiting outside the pier to be shipped today on the same ship, the Poinciana. And police think most of these will turn out to be stolen also. Jack Paxton, NBC News.
To sum up the morning's major news, General Charles de Gaulle died during the night at his country home 100 miles from Paris. He was 79, would have been 80 on November 22nd. Death was caused by a heart attack which struck the former president as he watched television with his wife. De Gaulle's passing was officially announced in Paris this morning. All radio stations halted their regular programs and played only solemn music, and the National Assembly adjourned for the day. A special cabinet meeting was called amid talk of a state funeral, but officials said de Gaulle left instructions he was to be buried without ceremony, and that's the way it will be on Thursday. That's today's news. 10:30 after the hour, the national weather pattern is on the moderate side for today. West winds and Pacific air masses cover most of the country. Temperatures this afternoon will be in the 40s and 50s across the north, the 60s and 70s for the south, and 80s for southern Florida, Texas, and Arizona. Rain today for the east from North Carolina and the Virginias to Pennsylvania and New York to Michigan. New England will be cloudy. Thunder showers are due for the southeast coast into Florida. A large Pacific fair weather system will now have overspread the central half of the nation, from the plains to the Mississippi Valley, the Gulf states, and most of the Midwest. A low center over Wyoming will bring light rain to the Dakotas and snow or rain through the Rockies. The nation's only heavy snow today will be in Yellowstone National Park. The far west will be fair except on the northwest coast, where another inland surge of ocean rains is due. Rainfalls will be heavy on the Oregon coast, lighter for Washington and northwest California. 11 and a half after the hour now. Hugh?